It is time for another installment of Ask Your Meteorologist. And joining me today is WCIA 3's Jacob Dickey. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's been busy for us around here.
It has been, I know, all the snow and
cold.
This morning when I came in, I felt it was like a little bit of, it wasn't quite hail, but it definitely was not just snow.
Yeah, it's been hit and miss here and there, something, you know. We've been busy, that's for sure. So.
Great, well, I have a question to keep you even more busy.
All right.
Is there a proper way to measure snow? That is my question today.
Is there a proper way to measure snow? Actually, we got this question quite a bit. So we had a couple of big winter events towards the beginning of the month here. That first event in January, we had folks saying, well, it's blowing and drifting. How am I supposed to know how much snow fell? You know, it's 2 feet here and 2 inches there in my yard. And so we've got some ways that we can help do that for you to kind of illustrate that process. So first off, have you ever seen a setup like this?
No, I see that it says snowboard, but when I think of a snowboard, I think of riding down a
That's true, yes.
hill with my feet in.
Most people would think snowboard, oh, that means we're going skiing, boarding down the mountain, things of that. Well, a snowboard is a thing that we use as meteorologists, and basically it's just a flat piece of wood or a flat object that's there. A lot of people have a makeshift snowboard in their house. Patio table can be an example of that, different things like that. Here, somebody made a cutting board, and they stuck it outside. Then they've got the ruler there to measure. So a snowboard is a great way, because what's the difference if you stick your ruler in grass versus on the sidewalk, right?
Right.
What's the difference? And you don't necessarily want to do your sidewalk, but you're sticking in the grass, you've got that extra space.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. So snowboard gives us a clean slate that we can actually more accurately capture that. If you have to, use a patio, use the sidewalk, get that more accurate measurement, but we use this here. And I've got some tips to talk about measuring snow. First off, you use a snowboard. You also have to have it in a proper spot. You don't want your snowboard close to a house where trees could impede on the snowfall, where it might drift and swirl around. So you want to have it in more open space. You're going to, of course, insert your ruler vertically. I think that's common sense, but we'll stick it there for clarity. And the interesting thing is actually to properly measure, you actually want to measure the snow every 4 to 6 hours. You can even do every 2 to 3 hours at a heavy event. And every time you measure, clear that board of all of the snow, stick your board, pick it up, put it back on top of the snow. Because a lot of times in those bigger events, you actually will have the snow compact down. You start getting 6 inches and more. The weight of that will combine it and push it together. And so then you're also thinking of how much snow is falling.
Right.
Because that compaction that can occur, it also doesn't mean the snow depth will be the same. So when we talk about snow depth, we're saying, well, how much is actually on the ground versus how much that's fallen? Typically, more will fall than actually sticks and sits on the ground because of that compaction factor. And then something else that's interesting, if you take a core of the snow, think of like if you stuck a rain gauge and took that cylinder of snow, you could also melt that snow down in the microwave and see how much water content is there. When you have a lighter, fluffier snow, there'll be way less snow, way less water per snow compared to if you had a heavy wet snow and you melted it down. So then you can not only say, well, I had 10 inches of snow, but also the water content, there was a whole 1.5 inches of water in there. Do a little math, you can calculate the snow ratio. That was a really heavy wet snow.
And I feel like even if you're not using it per se to calculate the snow, I feel like that would be a really fun experiment to take a certain amount of snow, melt it in the microwave, measure the amount of water, and do that on different days, and you can kind of see what kind of snow you're having. If you have kids at home, I feel like that'd be a really fun thing to do if it's a little too cold to play outside, but you still want to play with the snow.
Right, and when you do that, take a straight core up and down. When we talk about a core, it's almost like you're taking like a, if you've ever been in the garden and you take those shovels that have the full round circle, you're taking a big thing to put a, you know what I'm talking about? Right? Yeah, what's that?
It kind of looks like an apple core type of.
Yeah, you're basically taking the core of that apple, you're taking the core of that snow, just a narrow column there. And then you can tell, hey, do I have dry snow? Is it heavy and wet? That ratio of water that's in there. And as you go through the winter, you can add them all together. Did we have more wet snow through the winter? Did we have more dry snow? And there are people who also care about that because they want to know how much water is in the snow. Agriculture, farmers love to get that water into the soil. Spring season's around the corner, things like that. So really interesting to see. Okay, I got a question for you.
Okay.
So in this picture here that we've got, if you measure the snow here, and this is what your yard looks like, can you tell how it's drifted in some spots? It's not as even.
Yeah, it looks like it's a little bit deeper by the bushes.
How are you going to measure that? Maybe you forgot your snowboard, you didn't put out in time. What's the best way to measure that? Do you have an idea?
I mean, again, my thought would be take a ruler and try and do it,
Yes.
but that's the snowboard.
But you might get 6 inches here and 3 inches there.
Right.
So one of the best things you could do is you have an open area that's better, maybe not as drifted, not close to the house, not under trees.
Right.
Take an average, take 5 or 6 measurements,
Oh,
average
okay.
them together, and that will give you a more accurate representation
Nice.
of how much snow is. Of course, if one of your measurements is, the 3-foot drift at the end of the drive,
Right.
and the other one is ½ inch up the line, you're going to find that maybe that's not quite as accurate. But you kind of add more data, take more measurements around the yard, and then average those together. That gives you a more accurate way to measure how much snow has fallen.
So you can use the same tool, but then
Same
be a
thing.
more accurate scientist
All comes
by
down to
doing
a ruler.
multiple
Yeah, a
tests.
ruler. Then, of course, you got a bowl and a microwave, but
Right.
take that extra step. But that's a little bit about how you can accurately measure snow. And the thing is, too, is think of how complicated that is. There's people who miss steps here and there on the way.
Sure.
Snowfall forecasting, that could get a little tricky. We say, hey, 6 to 10 inches, but depending on how someone measures,
Right.
everyone's going to
It's
have
a little bit different.
Yeah, and then we get the emails. And,
Right. Well, I would say that ultimately, if you're measuring correctly at home, it's probably going to match whatever Jacob has told you on the television.
Hopefully. That's the goal we have. So.
Well, thank you so much for being here and answering our weather-related questions. If you have a weather-related question, you can email Jacob at jdickey@wcia.com, and you can find us on Facebook.